Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Impractical Machinist Podcast. My name is Patrick. You can find me on Instagram as @JobShopperTM.
I'm Cameron from Machining is Cool.
I'm Bradley with Marvel Machining.
On today's episode, we're joined by Joe Kaslowski, owner of Random Fabrication in Orange County, California. We're going to get a deep dive on how Joe went from being a self-taught hobby machinist to the owner of a successful CNC job shop in his garage, all while holding down a day job. Howdy, Joe. How's it going?
Good. What's up, guys?
Glad to have you on here, bud.
Glad to be on it. Listen to pretty much every episode, and
Well, we appreciate it.
now you're on the world famous machining podcast.
World famous.
Yeah.
Week, third country entries.
Yeah. So I don't know if I would say famous, but it's around the world.
I guess, Joe, just kind of give us the way I understand it is you, like I said in the intro, you got started kind of as a hobby. You were interested in becoming a machinist. You'd never really done it before. Kind of give us a little view of like how that started for you.
Yeah. So I've always grown up. My dad was kind of the, work on everything, but be a master of nothing type, which in a sense I kind of feel a lot that way still is one of those things of, I grew up like, oh, this weekend we're, replacing sprinklers. This week we're doing oil changes on the car. This week we're like building some cabinets for the house. This week we're doing, countertop or, whatever it was that needed to be done. It was like on that weekend or whatever. But, my dad was doing, or was like, oh, we're going camping. Oh, we need to, wire this thing up or replace these batteries or do, whatever needed to be done. So that was kind of how I grew up, how my old man was, how he even is to this day. So I grew up that way, just kind of working on everything, doing everything. Got heavily into cars when I was like 15, basically like the old Fox body 5.0 Mustangs. And that was kind of like born out of necessity. Whereas like the first thing that really like drove home like doing stuff myself was, the water pump on my first Mustang is leaking. Go to a shop. Oh, this was, I don't know, mid 90, 95, something like that. I was probably a junior in
Late 20th century.
Yeah. Way back in the 90s. Basically went to a shop, oh, we got to pull the radiator. We got to pull this. We got to pull that, it's going to be like $300 or something at the time, and when you're making $6 an hour, that's a lot of hours.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, it's not leaking bad yet. What am I going to do? So you go to good old Pep Boys and you go in there, oh, the part's like $18 or whatever. And the gasket kit's like, $5. Like, okay, I guess what I know what I'm doing this weekend. And so that was kind of like what got my foot into the door of like cars and just kind of building everything. It was like out of necessity, whereas I just couldn't afford to fix the, to have somebody else work on it. So it was like, I basically just got a box of parts and started tearing shit apart in my parents' driveway. You know what I mean? And it was like, and I ended up buying a Chilton's manual or a Haynes manual or whatever it was, but it's nice. YouTube didn't really exist at that point. I think it might have been up, but there wasn't really, it wasn't now where you can, just search like, oh, how do you replace this?
You couldn't just Google everything.
What? Yeah, exactly.
Google everything.
So it was one of those things where you just, figure it out with, pictures in a manual and just kind of start taking stuff apart and then hope it goes back together. And actually that job went really well. And so, I think that was part of the satisfaction was that I got this whole thing done and apart and put it back together. And then you pull out of the driveway and you drive it. In the first like 5 minutes, you're like super skeptical. And then the next, 30 minutes, you're like, oh shit, this might actually work. You know what I mean? And then 6 months later, you're like, okay, like I did this. It runs, like everything's fine. Like I got enough confidence that if something does go wrong again, like I could do that same job in probably half the time. So that was kind of like the thing. And so that just kind of spiraled on cars and it ended up being the same thing. Ended up flipping a ton of cars when I was in high school, college. It was just buy cars, build my own cars, nitrous kits, superchargers, build motors, pull trannies. You'd go it was kind of like the heyday for those, for the Mustangs, where they were old enough that you could get them for cheap, but they were still like demanding enough that they had like a solid demand. It was kind of like one of those things, like on paper and in KBB, the Kelly Blue Book stuff, they were cheap, but if you had the right combos, the 5.0 motor or manual transmission, like they were still super desirable.
Yeah.
So, people would go, some little old lady would go to like sell her car or whatever and look it up on KBB, and it would be like, $1,200 or whatever, but that car would be easily worth $5,000-6,000. So you'd scour, like, then at the time, like Recycler, you have like print ads, and you'd look through and you'd be like, oh shit, okay, there's this 91 GT, and some lady's listing it for $1,500, and you'd go and she's, well, I just bought another car, and they offered me $800, and I just figured I'd put it up for sale. And so it's like, boom, pay $1,500 for the car, detail it, fix whatever little BS needed to be done, and then turn around 2 weeks later and sell it for $5,000. So I was pretty much the majority of the existence of my high school and college years, and then that basically just, and I've always kind of been that's pretty much the entire way I built my shop, is just looking for deals, fixing stuff that need to be fixed. The Speedio was the first like real new expensive thing that I've ever bought. And pretty much all my cabinets, all the lists of stuff, like almost everything else, literally almost everything else in my shop besides the Speedio has been bought secondhand, fixed, painted, bartered with, whatever. So, I got into cars, and then I did that for a little while, and then got out of cars, and it was just the whole California thing. I mean, I did a lot of welding and stuff like that for the cars, shaved the engine bays, did a lot of that kind of stuff. And then later it was like, okay, I want to start working with stuff with my hands again. I want to kind of start doing this stuff. And then, so that was, really wanted to get into the CNC machine, but I was like terrified. This was like probably my mid to late 20s. Had my own place, had a garage. I was like, well, now I got room for tools. And then ended up just buying a lathe, as a whim, kind of this looks fun. I had another project for a dresser that I wanted to refurbish, wanted to build some feet for it. I was like, this would be cool if I could make them out of aluminum. I was like, well, what do I need to do that? Oh, if I want to just make these round feet, super simple, doesn't look that hard, I guess I just buy a metal lathe. So knowing that I can't leave well enough alone, I basically looked all up and down. Craigslist was big at the time. And so it was just like scouring Craigslist every day, looking for stuff. Found one that was so I found a small, like 11-inch Logan. It's kind of the same conversations people still have to this day, even in the group chat or Facebook or whatever. Oh, what level lathe, what hobby lathe or real thing or hobby CNC? I had an actual like residential electrician come over that was like a friend of a friend. And he comes over and looks at it and was just like, I don't know, bro. Like, you already know more about this stuff than I do. Like, if you need me to wire up some, if you got like a diagram or something, or you need to like pull wire or do whatever you could do, but I can't help you with like any of the 3-phase stuff.
Huh.
Like, all right. So,
Well,
ended up just, buying a little 5-horse rotary phase converter, powering up this Logan lathe that I bought. And that was kind of like the beginning of the end. And then, so did manual stuff for like a while, like a good while. The lathe actually just kind of sat for a while, and it was like I'd go out and mess with it and make certain things. I mean, I did kind of my first project to build my little feet, and then after that I was like, now what? And then it started, when I started building more and more stuff for myself, it got handy. And then it was like, okay, I can drill and tap this, I can turn these off, turn these things flat. And then ended up buying an Induma vertical mill. And then, so those were my 2 machines for like a long time, which is basically like a, kind of like a Bridgeport clone. And that kind of got me involved in like rigging, because I ended up having to pay a rigger to go get the mill. The lathe I had moved myself with a trailer, and that was a whole ordeal on its own. But my first real introduction to like rigging and stuff was, I met this dude. I forget where. I think somebody recommended him. Oh, actually, it was the guy that I had bought the mill from recommended him to me. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm just going to give this guy $1,000 or whatever to move this mill. Cause I got no way to move 1,500 pounds or 2,000 pounds or whatever it is. And, you started watching this guy, and I paid him to move a couple things after that. It was like, I think I got this. And then I started buying equipment. Like you kind of start watching, and I started buying, and then I started just moving stuff around. It got to the point where I was like, okay, I can move stuff around my garage now. I can move this. I can get this on a tray. And it was just, it was kind of like all these like small, slow steps incrementally of stuff that you paid for. And then you just kind of figure out by like watching these guys work, and then I would still pay to get like big machines or something that was awkward, like moved, but it gave you more and more confidence where, as soon as you move a machine around your garage, you're like, okay, I think I could load this on like a drop deck trailer now, you know?
Hmm.
So it's just kind of like, it was just kind of like, it's always just been kind of a slow burn for me. It's just one thing after another. I've never really, I kind of jumped in both feet, but at the same time, like I've always had a full-time job. So it's been, I feel like my arc hasn't been as fast as some people where it's just, I'm going to do this, and then you learn it's like that learning curve is kind of just shoved all together and you're forced to learn all of it. It was kind of like more of like, okay, this weekend I'm doing this weekend I'm doing that. And it just kind of like everything kind of trickles out. And then, it feels like everything's so slow. And then you look back and you're like, damn, like, yeah, I really do know a lot. Or when you talk to other people and, you talk to, stuff that we have in conversation that people are like on the similar or same level as you, and everything makes sense and conversations flow. And then you have a conversation with a random person, what I mean, at work or some other coworker that is not in the field or whatever. And they just kind of stare at you with this like blank look on your face. Like you're a mill in your garage now. What's going on?
It's amazing how many people don't know what machining is.
Yeah.
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 It kind of catches me off guard, like both ways, because you talk to a lot of people and they don't know, but then there's also this whole like kind of crazy underground network of people that are into it as well. Like,
What is your full-time job that you're working?
so I work for a fire department. So I'm not a firefighter. I do mainly inspections now. I do all new construction stuff. So it's basically sprinklers, anything kind of related to like fire safety, fire protection. So I would we have a separate plans guy that does all the plans. So basically people submit plans, they do all that, and then I basically just go out and field verify all in. So I do residential, I do, right now we're doing a ton of construction. Like we have like a resort area, we have a ton of like townhome, condo construction, just tons of commercial stuff. We do everything from new construction to like, you can do everything from like hey, we had to move these two heads, for like a TI, like a tenant improvement, which is like, if you have like a machine shop or something, you guys already had, like a sprinkler setup, and it's like, hey, we had to recalculate this. We built these 4 new offices or whatever, and we had to drop heads into these new offices. Like that would be, at least in California, it would be submitted, as like a change, and everything would kind of get like recalculated and make sure like the coverage is still good. So I just basically go out and field verify that. So I do that. And then I've been doing that for a couple years now. And then prior to that, I was basically on hazmat stuff for 16, 17 years. So that was basically how I started my career. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton with a chemistry degree, and then got hired into the fire department doing chemical stuff. So it was basically emergency response, inspections, environmental compliance law. So we would basically do all the like compliance inspections, do emergency response when stuff didn't go according to plan for some of these companies. It is kind of surprising how many people do the same thing for 15 years and then all of a sudden still make a mistake. You know what I mean? It's the wrong stuff goes in the wrong drum, and all of a sudden you've got a massive fire, or, the thing explodes in the guy's face, or, been out on scenes where drums have exploded. We had one that exploded off of a pallet and wrapped itself around a rafter like 50 feet in the air.
Damn.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
all kinds of stuff like that. So, most of the time it was pretty mundane, but, definitely. So we worked a lot with PD, mainly just for like bomb squad stuff. So that's pretty much my main job. And that's what I was doing for the first 16, 17 years. And then now still in the fire department, but just shuffled over to a different assignment for, just learn something different, do something different, kind of keep it fresh. But, that's part of why I think I've kept it as a day job for a while and a long time is like, I have a good pension pending. I have, I get paid pretty well for what I do, so it's a lot of stability to give up, and then, another one of those things that make you think is I don't know how long everybody's been following me for, but I broke my neck in 2021.
Right.
And so it was, like, it's very nice to have good healthcare. I don't know. It definitely like puts those thoughts in the back of your head.
Right.
Sure.
Oh, that'd be tough to leave, and you got kids too, right? So
Yeah, and I'm married. I've been married to my wife now for a while, and we have 2 kids, 11 and 8-year-old boys. So it's pretty much like WWE around here 99% of the time.
good healthcare is important. I chased pay early on, and I wish I would have chased better benefits.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that always makes me think is like, the fire department's like treated me well. It's like any job, there's frustration sometimes, but overall it's like it's hard to turn down because it's close to my house. I've got maybe like a 15-minute commute every day. I go, even if there is traffic, I pretty much go the opposite way of traffic. So, for everybody that doesn't know, I live in Southern California, so traffic's pretty much in most of the time thing. So even when there is traffic, it doesn't really affect me that much going to and from work, which is super nice.
Nice. So that's interesting, man. You've kind of got from a professional look, you kind of got more of like a white collar profession.
Yeah.
But
It's
then,
kind of like a mix. It is kind of like a mix. I'm out in the field every day. I'm literally walking job sites every day.
sure, but that helps give you a good foundation to build your home business off of. Because yeah, I mean, like on the healthcare thing, that's one of the things that, like as many like home shop guys that we've interviewed, uh, that's one of the hardest things. And Brad said this before too. Like benefits, if they're hard to come by in a blue collar trade anyway, right? Like a lot of shops don't offer the best benefits, healthcare and stuff like that. Um, so when you find a place that does, it's good to latch onto it because it's really hard to get when you're on your own. It's much more expensive,
It's terrible.
right?
It's very expensive, and it doesn't cover anything. I was just in the hospital not too long ago, and I think the bill I got was like $2,200, and I paid $1,500 a month for insurance.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't cover anything.
Yeah. Like our company, so I use my wife's health insurance. She works in a hospital, so we got pretty good health insurance there. But I know our shop, like it ain't cheap. Like Sam, I know it costs him. I think he pays more than you do, Brad, every month for health insurance for
Oh, I bet.
him and his wife and 2 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been one of the things, that's always been like a consideration is because, my wife does work too. She's got a good job. We both do pretty good. So, theoretically, if push came to shove, we could get on her insurance, but I think she actually has the same company as I do, but I think they pay quite a bit more. Like it's it's crazy. I think I pay $250 a month, $200 a month. If that, it might even be less than that. I don't know, for the whole family.
That's where we are. My wife's plan.
Yeah. So and then on top of that, like the coverage is crazy good. Like prescriptions are like $10.
Yeah.
Or whatever for, whatever you need. Like it's never like an issue.
Yeah. I would say insurance would probably be the biggest thing that keeps people from going all in on their own shop or their own business.
It's probably one of the biggest things it's honestly probably one of the biggest things that's held me up. Well, it's more of the soft benefits. Like the pay, I think I could replace pretty easily. Like there might be a little bit of a lull, I guess. One of the things that I've always thought about is leaving the city. There would probably be a lull of like maybe a year before, where if you're on your own, busy part-time is different than busy full-time.
Yeah.
Like it takes a lot more work to fill up 40, 50 hours a week than it does to fill up, 10 or 20 hours a week.
Well, because like right now, you're only going to take on so much work because you know how much time you have. And
Exactly.
since you're not all in on just machining, you're not searching as hard for work.
Yeah, and then that's one of those things that's always unknown too. Like if I left my job, theoretically, if I left my job tomorrow, like how much work would come? I mean, would there be enough to fill more time to fill? I mean, and that's what I'm saying. I know at some point it would come, but what that curve look like?
Right.
You know what I mean? And then that's always been the hardest thing for me is, I'll be 44 this year. It's like I'm getting close to retirement from the, technically I can retire at 50 from the city if I want. It benefits me a little bit, benefits me quite a bit actually to stay longer. But that's one of those things that, what's that trade-off? You know what I mean? But I also came into machining late. So, if I was 20 or 25, I see some of these guys that are young. It's like, okay, if I had to, if I didn't have wife and kids and, mortgage to pay and all this other like lifestyle stuff that I've already kind of like accustomed to, like if I was kind of starting out and was paying rent, it's like, well, shit, I think I'm just going to rent a shop. And if I got to live in the shop for 2 years, then I'll do that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But-
It seems like the way you're doing it's going to be pretty great. Like by the time you retire, you'll have a well-established business, and that's going to be a great retirement job. Yeah,
that's honestly what I'm like kind of pushing for at this point.
Yeah.
And then, my kids are 11 and 8. So as they get a little bit older, I want them to like help me more, and I know I've talked about this in the chat and stuff sometimes is it really does give me perspective on teaching the kids. I think it's like twofold. It obviously teaches them work and responsibility, and everything I have the kids do in the shop for the most part, I pay them for. Because it's like, hey, if you want money, if you want to do something, like you got to hustle. If you want money, like come tell me, I'll figure something out for you to do. There's a flip side where sometimes I just be like, hey, you need to do this. You know what I mean? But for the most part, even if I make them do something, I'll give them a couple bucks of like, hey, a lot of times there's stuff you don't want to do. You're going to do it. Like most of the time you'll get paid. You know what I mean? If that's a job, you're getting paid.
Are you paying them at least minimum wage?
No, hell no. Labor laws don't apply to your own children, so
No.
Nice.
But no, I feel like the other thing too is it helps me think down the road of how to simplify processes too. Like, how do I explain this to an 11-year-old? Or could I set up this machine? Which we also have these discussions in the chat of like hiring people. Not that I'm hiring anybody anytime soon, but it just makes you think about your processes and what you do. And like, could I explain this to an 11-year-old and have him like run parts? Or could I have this machine set up to where an 11-year-old could run parts? You know what I mean? And so, because sometimes that's your lowest common denominator. If you're hiring somebody, everybody wants to hire that rock star. Everybody wants to like hire that person that's like the same motivation that you are, that I love machining. I've learned all this on my own. I got this all figured out.
How many times have you heard yourself or somebody else say like, man, if I could just clone myself, I'd be perfect. If I could have two of them.
But everybody knows like that's not reality. Like the reality is like sometimes you just need another set of hands. And it's like, if you need to bring in another set of hands and you need them to like load parts or do something, like how can you make that process so simple that like you could explain it to an 11-year-old?
Yeah. And if you can explain it to an 11-year-old, then maybe a normal adult will handle it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But I would say also it's good for yourself too, even if you're not hiring anybody else, even for a long time, or say you never hire anybody else. Making things simple enough for an 11-year-old to do it means that you're putting in way less time, effort, and energy thinking about it, making sure things are right. Like if you got a good proofed out process for things, I mean, it's as simple as
Yeah, and that's another way that I look at it, is that it also helps my future self of
Right.
if you're putting together this process that like your kid can follow or anybody, you know, I could send my wife out there like, hey, can you run some parts? Or one of the kids, can you run some parts? Like that also helps me in the future of, you know, I don't have all this trickery going on. Like, what did I do here? What did I do here? You know, it's more just proven out where it's like, you know, and that kind of ties back to doing the same thing where if you're, you know, if you're setting up parts the same way, you're running parts the same way, you know, all these different things, like all these different pieces of the process kind of help simplify stuff for being able to hand them off to somebody else, but also like making your future life less agonizing.
Yeah. I follow that same kind of mentality. I try to make everything as simple as possible, even for myself, and try to record as much as I can, which I'm terrible at, but
Yeah.
still trying to do it because there's so many jobs I've come back to. I'm like, damn it, how the hell did I do this the last time? Then you're stuck solving the same problems you've already solved before,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't stand doing that. I hate that more than I hate recording the process while I'm doing it.
Yeah. And there's tons of times where you think about, I think some of the stuff that catches me off guard sometimes is when you're setting offsets. And that was a huge reason why I went to like the Lang stuff and started buying some of that stuff was just like, dude, I spend so much time training vices, doing all this other stuff. It's like, I'm just repetitively doing the same stuff over and over and over again, you know, and for me doing job shop stuff, it's like, I'm always like, this is just part of my process. It's part of like, you know, how I bring in jobs. I would say is to just set these things up real quick, make 100 parts or 50 parts or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and break it down and set up for the next one. So you find yourself when you don't want to do things, you find yourself kind of just cutting corners, not in like a negative way, but in the just like, I don't want to set this. Like, I'm just going to run this one vice in one station and make one part at a time because I don't want to like break it down.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of in this like weird kind of process of halfway in between where some stuff set up 0 point and some stuff's still like legacy. And that's, you know, that's just to me a time thing. And that's the stuff that I feel falls by the wayside of being part-time and not having a ton of time.
Right.
Work on stuff or really you know, I get so focused on machining parts sometimes that it's like some of the process stuff is like, well, just get it done for now.
Yeah.
But man, like like having the fourth axis in the machine and being able to just like stick a tombstone on there and not pick up on the offset, like it's, you know, the offset you remove. So it's,
Yeah.
you pick up a tombstone, you throw a tombstone in, you've got 8 spots or 4 spots or whatever for parts. So it's like, boom, in 5 minutes or whatever, I'm making 4 parts at a time or 8 parts at a time.
If you think about it too, I mean, think about the amount of time that you actually have available to be in the shop working on this stuff. Like you don't want to be spending your little bit of time that you have doing dumb stuff like trimming and vices or I don't know, just the dumb work that doesn't really add any value. You got to program things. You actually have to. You're the one that has to stand there and swap the parts out. And so, the faster you can get the machine running with as little work as possible, the better.
Yeah.
Like any of the like the 96 millimeter pattern stuff or you know the 0 point stuff, you slap it on there, tighten it down, you're good to go. The 0 point programming is awesome for that too. That's one of my favorite things. It almost feels like a cheat code, or it doesn't even feel real whenever you first start doing that. Like, 'cause I do the same thing with the fourth axis. I have it saved as an extended work offset, and then I have anything that goes infield, and so it's all built properly in the CAM environment. And so I'll slap it on there, load the program, and then press go. I feel like I shouldn't even be starting the program because I didn't do any work to get there.
I think that was a huge turning point for me. And it was kind of the same way. It was kind of the same way with the CNC plasma. It's like when you get to a point where you're at the machine and you're like running parts already, and you're like, man, I feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah.
You know, and like stuff's already running and parts are coming out good, and you're like, well, I feel like it's like that was the thing to me that kind of realized I actually might know what I'm doing sometimes. You know, is that you're able to like set parts up quickly. You know, you've already got tools set up, you've already got offset set up, you've like already got all these things rolling, and then boom, like all of a sudden you got parts coming off.
Yeah.
And you're like, damn, like I just made a first article in 10 minutes or whatever. You know what I mean? Or 5 minutes or it's like,
It's huge,
no
man.
matter like fidgeting, like whatever setup I came up with first, and threw it in there and the vise is already set up. Like it just worked. And like 80% of the tools were in there already, it feels good.
Yeah, that's something when I went on my own, I recall every shop I worked at, tearing down setups, resetting stuff up. It was just such a waste of time. I'd waste 4 hours a day doing that when I work places. So building out the machines how I did it, it's like you said, it's just quick. I'm not wasting half my day setting shit up. It's just set a part in and go.
And it's crazy how many shops still do that. Like,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, and I get like not every, and I get not every shop, it obviously it's obviously more of a thought if you've got 10 machines or 20 machines, like, okay, to outfit every machine with length or whatever, like a bit more of a, it's a little bit easier if you start with one machine, you're like, okay, let's spend, 10 grand or something on this. But then it's like, okay, if you've got, 20 machines, like, okay, it's like swapping, if you've bought 2 or 3 vices for every machine as you go, all of a sudden to pull the plug and say, well, I'm going to put Lang or Shunk or something on all these machines. Like you're talking about a hefty check,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the spot that we're at. I would love, honestly, Joe, a lot of the value in the quick change stuff I've seen from you. I mean, I'm enamored with your Lang setup that you've got. And I would love for us to have that here. But like you say, we've got 6 or 7 mills. It is hard to kind of all of a sudden, okay, we got to put all the Kurtz and all the orange vices away. We're doing nothing but Lang, which means all the old stuff's got to be reprogrammed. We've got to retrain all of our operators. It's tough. It's something that needs to happen, but it's tough to get over that hill.
I mean, you can make it work with what you got, though, too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. It's doing something to improve your startup time. It's,
Sure.
you don't have to get rid of the curved vices. You just need to build something that makes it easier to put them in and set them up quickly.
Or even as simple as, you can do 0-point programming off of a Kurt vise. All you need to do is pick up one corner that's stationary, and then there's your point. And then if you've got probing in the machine, for example, you can use that to drive your probe to find your part for you. So really all you're doing is putting your part in there. You have to, the one thing is you have to have that vise and whatever jaws you're using in your CAM software, like built in the CAM environment, the same as you're actually going to machine it. But once you make your jaws match everything in the machine is what you had on the computer, you're good. You just run it based off of that corner device.
That's true.
Yeah, no, that's been one of those things that I've been working on lately too, is getting all my or getting a lot of this stuff set up like parametrically, where you can have the parameters for with like the joints and all that. I know I've talked to Cam about this, and I mean, especially with Lang, they give you all the models and stuff, so it makes it pretty easy. There are people that have there are YouTube videos where you can watch to like do it, and once you kind of get the hang of it, it's not that difficult. But yeah, I mean, you basically just bring in the vice, and I think it is a little bit easier. Well, I guess I don't know if it would say easier, but it makes a little bit more sense with the centering vices because like both things move kind of the same. So it makes it easier to set up a 0-point system with a centering vice, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Not that you can't set up a parametric thing with like a regular Kurt or whatever, but when the center of your vice is always the center of your vice, whether it's open, a half an inch or 8 inches, and then you're picking up the center of the material and you load your material in the center, what I mean? It definitely makes it easier to program because all that's, that goes back to this, stay consistent. If you're always programming off the center of the vice and you're always programming off the center of the material, and then that's where Cam said, if you've got some sort of weird material, or say you've got like a burnout, or you've got like a water jet, or you've got something, some weird part, then it's like, okay, now I can use that 0-point to drive the probe to pick up some other weird feature. I mean, if you can't physically pick up like the center of the part, like, okay, maybe I can pick up this hole, or I can pick up whatever.
Yeah, and even if it's some sort of weird shaped material or whatever, where you can't do your normal 0-point programming, well, 90% of everything else you're doing is 0-point programming.
Exactly. So
like the majority of your other stuff you'll probably be able to run, off of the 0-point. So then, what, 10% of your jobs? I mean, random number, obviously, but a much smaller majority of your, I guess it would be a minority of your jobs would be actually manually picking up your parts, location, and doing like weird setup stuff.
Yeah, running the 0 point doesn't let you not do stuff like a traditional way and just say, "Hey, I've got this one weird part. I'm gonna go in and pick up this corner of this material or whatever." And I'm sure that's probably how Brad kind of runs the majority of like his horizontal stuff, I'm guessing.
Yeah, all my tombstones are actually based off bottom center of the tombstone. They're all G54. I built them all. So I built them all based off that one work order. And so when I program it, I bring the part to the tombstone and I place it in place. I don't pick anything up and I don't use probes either.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're basically just running giant fourth axis.
Yep. And like you said, in SolidWorks or CamWorks, I can adjust my vise, open, close. I have a distance thing there. So I tell it, my stock is 4 inches and the vise opens up 4 inches and then I set it in place.
Yep. That's the way it's
Quite
man.
easy. It's
quite nice.
I mean, I was out here yesterday and I was like, shit, I don't really want to set up another tombstone, but I threw in 12 parts and, brought the part on the tombstone, and I just rotated it 12 times.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, the tombstone and the fourth axis has been like huge for me because I think especially with job shop work, it forces you to learn a lot, but at the same time, it gets frustrating sometimes when you're like, okay, how much time do I really want to invest making these parts that I may or may not make again? And, so you're like, well, okay, do I want to go get $100 piece of material and order $200 worth of Mighty Bites and design this fixture? I've got a 100-part run. Okay, I can put 10 or 20 of these parts on a pallet and run a pallet that I may never run again. Or if they do, it might be 6 months or a year. Now I got to store this pallet, label the pallet so I know what the hell it goes to. You know what I mean? Like all these little things where it's like, I bought a bunch of those little Jin Gang whatever vices and have them on a bunch of different tombstones. Like, well, there's like majority of my first ops, is essentially like what it's like, boom, throw it in there. Got 4 or 8 parts at once. Like you can roll through a 100-part job like pretty quickly, 8 parts at a time.
Yeah.
On first op. And then it's like, okay, if you're getting 80 or 90% of your work done in the first op, then you're just coming in and I just make soft jaws or whatever, like normal, for a second off. And it's like, okay, so then I got to stand there for a couple hours or whatever and buzz off, second op parts and, just roll through that. But, it gives you a little bit more of that walk away time.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a lot easier for me to get like 15, 20, 30-minute walk away times, on the fourth axis, which has just been huge. So
the job shop work is always tough to decide if it's worth building a fixture. Do you spend that time up front making it more efficient, or do you just get the job done?
Yeah.
Like, and you don't know sometimes, is it going to come back? Does spend all the time and never see it again?
That's the big. And I think some of these shops, I mean, it definitely makes more sense with some of these shops. Like if you go to a bigger shop, right? And if you like, even if you're a quote unquote job shop, I mean, if you get a 10,000 part PO and you're a job shop, okay, well, it doesn't really matter as much if that job doesn't come back. It's probably still going to be worth it to make like a couple pallets or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But, like the level I'm at and the level a lot of guys in their garage or even just a lot of like small shops are at, like if you're at the point where you're getting 50 part, 100 part, even 2 or 3, 400 part POs, like, is it really worth making a pallet to hold 50 parts on a 200 part order? Like, how long is it going to take you to make that pallet?
Yeah.
Or, to get any sort of whatever, if you're not reloading the pallet every time, like now you're making 2 pallets.
Well, if you've got it set up like you have where your table is covered in laying plates and 4 vices on there at a time or something, you can run, or, you can run your tombstone with how many stations?
Yeah. And that's actually one of those, I was actually working on this last night is one of the tombstones that I built was like an 8 station, but I built that before I put the laying plate in. So now there's not enough room. So it hits on, I can't use the right side. So I can only use 4 at a time. So I'm actually going to kind of redesign that tombstone to make it more compact. I'm going to like shrink the base. I'm going to probably just make it the other one I made 2 pieces. So like a square base I just used material that I had. This is kind of like my first, like, hey, I've got a 4th axis. I've got some studs. Like, I'm just gonna make a tombstone. It was like one of the first tombstones that I made.
Yeah.
So now that I kind of know a little bit more, I think I'm gonna get just like a piece of round bar, and then I'll just make the whole thing from one solid piece of round bar. I can shrink the whole thing. I can make like the core. I can make the core of the tombstone a little bit smaller, and then hopefully I'm looking to basically just mount the vices the same exact way, because this is probably one of the tombstones I use the most, and then just get that where I can run 8 parts. It's weird because I've got like 4 or 5 jobs now that for whatever reason use the exact same material, like at these like 2-inch cubes. So it's basically 2x2 material cut to like 2.1. And I've got like 4 or 5 parts across like multiple customers that like all use this material, and I can put them all in the tombstone.
That's great.
So it's like, okay, I'm just gonna build a tombstone like for this stuff. And then so I'll be able to get, my goal is to basically fit 8 parts on the tombstone and then 8 parts in 2 of the orange vices and just drop them in there. And then so I could have basically 2 vices and the tombstone, and basically just have 8 full parts going off every cycle.
What benefit did you notice going from just having vices? Like, I don't know, I'm assuming you could run 4 parts at a time before. I think you had dual station orange vices or something.
Yeah, I had
to
before I bought the 4th axis, I had 3 dual station oranges.
yeah.
So I would either set them up if I had 3 op. Usually, if I had 3 op parts, I would set them up like just 1, 2, 3 in single station.
Yeah.
Or if I had some like just whatever the configuration, I would pretty much just left those things in all the time. And that was the thing that got frustrating when I went to the 4th, was that I found myself like moving vices all the time and then not wanting to put vices back in.
Yeah.
And so that was like kind of the big push over to like all the Lang stuff, is like, well, now I can just reorient vices or turn things or move things, and everything could just swap around easily without having to fit everything back in. And then I was able to put studs in the orange vices, and then it's like, well, I can still use these orange vices, and now they just go in the Lang.
Yeah.
The only annoying part is that you can't go backwards really without taking the studs out. So I've got the other, I actually just got the other brother, so I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to set that up yet. But that's the only thing, is that I won't be able to really use those vices in that other machine unless I bought another Lang plate for that machine, which I don't think I'm going to do right off the bat, but I might do at some point.
Yeah.
But I'd have to I'll just have to get regular vices for that machine.
It's not a huge deal to pull 4 studs out of an orange vice. I mean, that may just be the way to go for now.
Yeah, it might be if I'm going to switch them back and forth. But then the other thing, I'm probably going to need work holding to leave in there anyway, so I'll probably just end up buying, either a couple oranges or a couple Kurtz or something like that. I don't think I'm going to go anything crazy with that. I think it's going to be mainly simple parts or speed up my second op stuff off the tombstone, instead of having the tombstone in the machine. You know what I mean? Or instead of doing the second op in that machine, I could basically, half my runtime kind of thing.
Yeah, if you could do your 8 op 1s on your tombstone and the Speedio, and then figure out a way to do 8 op 2s, basically just to finish the back end of the part on the new machine.
Yeah, that might be the direction I go.
Yeah.
What is the machine you just got?
So it's basically, it's another brother. It's a S2DN. So it's basically the last version before the Speedio. So I have a 700 X2, which is all that means is just the 700 millimeters in X. So all of them, well, at least that series of machine, it's the 300, the 500, the 700, and they all are like basically 16 inches in Y. But then you've got 300 millimeters, 500 millimeters, and 700 millimeters in Y. So I have the 700 millimeter, and they're all like, I think, similar chassis, and they share a lot of the same parts. They have 1,000, but it's a lot more expensive for some reason, and it's kind of its own thing. So it's usually not even Yamazin and brother. They don't really it's all the same family, but they don't really associate them. I don't know. It's a little weird. I still don't understand why they do it that way. but that's their like kind of 40/20 machine is their 1000. But it's also quite a bit more expensive than than any of the other machines. And then I bought the 700 because there's not really there was only like a $2,000 difference between the 700 and the 500. And then the 300s are tiny. I mean, it's like the size of a phone booth, and you can't even really get them unless you like special order them, I guess.
Oh, wow.
But one minute it would make sense if you were making just a bunch of tiny parts or whatever, and you just wanted spindles per square foot. But I mean, for a job shop or if you're in your garage, like there's literally no reason to buy anything but a 700 unless you have space constraints for some reason, because the 500 isn't any cheaper. But that being said, I have a 700X2. The previous generation was a 700X1, and then this S2DN was the generation before the X1 Speedios. So it's basically the last generation before they changed to the Speedio. And it's essentially the 500. So it's like a 500 millimeter-ish travel. I think the wide travel is about the same. I think it's about 15 and a half, 16 inches, something like that. But the fun thing about this machine is it is a high-speed spindle, so it's got a 27K spindle. But the nice part about I should be able to share all the tools, share all the programs. Like it still has USB loading. It still has, like all the program nomenclature is the same. The tools, it takes all the same tools. So that was like a huge benefit to me was, yeah. I had that other lathe for a while and just sat there for a year and did nothing.
That CNC lathe?
What?
That CNC lathe you had?
Yeah, that Mori.
Yeah.
And it just, I mean, this is ultimately, I think, going to be a better setup. Like I can already hit the ground running. I can basically load all the programs and stuff I already have.
You're saying better to have 2 mills than a mill and a lathe.
For me, I think in my situation, yeah, like 100% right now. I think if I had a shop space or I had more room and I didn't really have to worry about it, I would like to have a lathe to do, there are some jobs, and I might need to farm out some lathe work for a new customer that I've got. Or it's kind of a mix. Like some of his parts need some lathe work, but that's another thing to figure out. But yeah, I just think it'll, to come back to, the timing and everything too, is just I only have so many hours to kind of figure a lot of this stuff out.
Yeah.
And so just to be able to like double tap 2 mills, it just makes so much more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, but the barrier for entry on that one's pretty low. I mean, you literally already have the programming or like already have the post processor for it, the tooling for it.
Yeah.
Have to get some work holding and get the machine wired up and leveled, and you're ready to roll.
Yeah, and I had my electrician out today, and so he came and looked at it, and so he's gonna give me a quote on. So I bought a Phase Perfect. So I'm running a 15 horsepower, old like rotary phase converter that I've literally ran since my first machine. So that's still running the Speedio today. Every now and then I have like some small electrical issues, like nothing crazy, but it has like regen kind of issues with the spindle breaking. So I'm hoping some increased overhead room. I'm putting in a 20 horsepower Phase Perfect that I got from a friend of a friend. And then I'm going to put in a 3-phase sub panel like after that. So it'll be basically the Phase Perfect, a sub panel, the transformer that I have already to bucket from 240 down to 208. And then that should basically run both machines. Hopefully no problem.
Nice. Yeah, that'll be a cool setup.
Sweet, dude. That's good.
Yeah, and then my compressor is a Mate. It's like a rotary vane, kind of similar to like a Kaiser or something like that, but it's quiet. But it's a 5 horse, but it's single phase, so it's got its own breaker, and I don't have to really worry about like the phase conversion or like running it off of a phase converter. So that's been kind of nice too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, phase converters are a weird thing. Like you can talk to one person and they've got, some badass phase converter and their one machine will bog it down. Then you talk to somebody else like Brad where he's got like some 20-year-old like 5 horsepower phase converter he's off of it.
I think the other thing too,
And you're
a lot of it has to do with behind the scenes stuff of like where your power comes from, how close you are to the power, other people on the pole, like what, you know what I mean? I think a lot of that is I think a lot of the issues that people have is stuff that they can't really control, which I think is why there's such a variable on the experience people have with phase conversion. That's just kind of like my gut feeling.
Yeah.
Is that I
mean,
feel
that's
like there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that
I
people
run the
aren't really aware
30
of.
horse American rotary, and it powers all 4 of my machines. No problem.
Yeah, and I don't think I would have had any issues with a rotary either, like because I've got a 15 horse right now, and I think with the Speedio, from my understanding, it kind of runs like a Prius or a hybrid or whatever kind of thing, where it's actually sending juice back to the grid when it breaks. Because the majority of the issues that I have is always when it's stopping from 16K. So it's always the high speed machining. Um, it's usually when it's like multiple tools in aluminum, like back to back to back. So it'll be like tool change, tool change, tool change, and then I'll get like an alarm on it'll give me a warning on the control. And then every now and then I'll go out there and it'll just alarm out, and I think it's got like probably a built-in resistor or something in there that helps burn off some of the energy that it can't dump. And then I think at a certain point that probably just overheats, and then that's when it just alarms out.
Yeah.
But I've heard the Phase Perfect is a lot better at handling that kind of stuff. Because I think the Haas actually just does have like a resistor basically thing and just burns it off as heat. And then you already have the DTs set up, or even the regular machine set up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all 4 of mine have it on top of them.
Yeah, it's basically like a little heater block, and like it basically just dumps the juice to that and just like burns it off as heat.
Interesting.
Since we're talking about your machines, we had a question from Tuck Garage. He asked, why a brother machine? Well, he asked 3 questions, but get many Yahoos in your shop. So let's go, why a brother machine, and how long before you get robots?
The brother to me was like always the clear choice. I mean, when you're in a garage, you don't have a ton of options anyway, right? I mean, you probably could fit. I mean, I had the fit all. My very first machine was a very brother adjacent machine. It was like the same kind of setup. And so the biggest problem with most machines is height. I mean, it's like, even now when I look at machines, it's like, no matter what you want to buy, it's like, well, I got to get it through the door. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What height is your door?
Mine is like right about 80. It's a little under 84 inches. So it's like 83 and a half, I think,
No.
which is actually another fun adventure because the new brother, which is smaller than my Speedio, was actually taller than the Speedio. So when the riggers came and I had everything ready to go, and then they go to slide it in, it was like 4 inches too tall.
Oh.
So I had to so I got the riggers like standing there staring at me, I was like, what? And so I ended up I had never really taken the brothers apart that far before, but I ended up having to take like 4 of the tool change fingers. So I ended up having to take all the sheet metal off the top. I ended up having to take 4, like the whole front, kind of the tool changer off. I had to take 4 of the tool finger, like the little fingers that hold the actual tools. So I had to take 4 of and then that was enough and then I had to take the Z servo off. And none of which I knew how to do. So I was like all trying to figure this out, like while those guys are standing there, like staring at me.
Pressure's on. Are they
$200 an hour or whatever they charge? But they were cool. And overall went pretty smooth, but it totally caught me off guard because here I was like this machine. I mean, it's not, I mean, even though the Speedio is not huge, like this machine, like, oh, you look at it and it's like, oh, it looks physically smaller than the Speedio. So I'm like, okay, cool. And then like, why is this thing 4 inches taller than the Speedy? Because the Speedio went in no problem. Literally just took a couple, I took the little doghouse to the tool changer off, which is just sheet metal, like 4 bolts. And then I think we took like some air deflector or whatever thing off, and that was it. And it slid in, and I had like probably 2 inches of gap. And then we go to put this machine in, and it's like, why is this machine so much? And it was like slammed. I had the feet, the screws on the bottom were all the way out, the feet were out. Like it was literally like the casting, sitting on the ground and still looking at it going, this thing's 4 inches too tall, you know?
Dang, man.
So when you get a robot,
I am actually looking at robots at the end of the month, January. So I found a company called AI5X. And one of the things that's intrigued me, I've looked at pretty much everything under the sun, but if somebody has suggestions on robots that I haven't looked at, please send them to me. Yeah. And at the same time, I've heard everybody say that like automation will quickly show you the holes in all your processes.
Yeah.
So after that, I know I can almost guarantee my first issue is going to be chips. Yeah. So I've got a couple parts that I know I can throw on there probably right away that aren't a ton of like material removal. So it'll probably work. But the problems are kind of twofold, where it's chip volume on bigger parts is like a huge issue. Like if all of a sudden you're banging out 15 parts and it's like, aluminum loves to get fluffy. So you've got, just a large volume of chips.
you're at
And then the other thing is, some of these parts, even like a 2-inch tall part, when you're finishing that thing in one pat or, like in a full length of cut gas, like those chips just pack up or they just fluff up inside the enclosure and it's hard to get them to flush out.
yeah.
I don't know if you have like kind of the same issue, Brad, with like the horizontal, if you're like doing tall finishing passes, like they just don't.
Those chips piss me off, man.
Yeah, that's my only complaint with my horizontal is it's got the 2 screws that push it out into a conveyor. And then in that conveyor area, it just fills up. I have to climb in my pallet pool and I got to push them through.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the Speedio doesn't have any auger, like, I know there's a lot of people that aren't really familiar with the Speedio, but the Speedio doesn't have any auger, like the way it comes from the factory, it works pretty well for the most part, but the chip-in does fill up pretty fast especially with aluminum and no chip auger because it's essentially just a basket. So there's two like troughs on either side. And so as you're running, if you're running a chip splitter or you're running a rougher or even like a face mill or something like that that's generating kind of like smaller chips, it's usually not an issue. But a lot of times you'll run like a finisher, especially with like a tall finisher, like a 2-inch finisher, and you're getting these kind of like long, fluffy, stringy chips.
Yep.
Then, man, like even a couple of those get kind of like wedged sideways in the drain, and then everything just starts to pack up behind it. And then all of a sudden, you look in there 2 minutes later and there's 15 pounds of chips like backed up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I would play around with finishing with endos that have chip breakers on them.
Yeah. So actually, another dude I met locally, Jimmy, Acme Tool Grinding. I found out that he's local here and he's cool. And he's ground a couple custom tools for me already. And then we talked a little bit about finishers and some of the other stuff. So actually what he's going to try for me is I bought like 3 2-inch length YGs and he's going to actually just put tiny chip breakers in them for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to see if I can finish with that.
Yeah.
I know some parts it won't be an issue because they get tumbled. But this new customer that I've got is kind of not, I mean, the customer's not kind of a pain, but like the parts are kind of a pain because he takes them off the machine. So, like they gotta look good, like right off the machine.
Yeah.
So he's one that I want to run a lot of the automation stuff on. So it's like, it's going to be a headache to figure out.
I had a job a while back. I was using a 3/4, 3-inch length and cut flute, and I was getting long chips building up everywhere, and I was trying to find a way to get them to flush through. And I ended up putting it in my grinder myself, and I put on chip breakers. I just did it. I think I went every like inch, but I alternated flutes, and I ran, and you couldn't even tell they were there, but it did break down the chips pretty well.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. Like I finished with chip breakers a handful of times, and everybody says you're going to get the lines. And I will say, like with steel, for example, when your end mill starts breaking down, you will get that. In aluminum, I haven't actually noticed any lines like that. I've gotten about as good of a finish I'll have a chip breaker in those. I would a normal one.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, probably a lot of it comes down, I'm guessing too, like a lot of it has to do with like harmonics and some of the other stuff. Like, I'm sure you just got to find kind of like an RPM and feed that works too.
Yeah.
Where, cause like at some point you're probably like overlapping where the chip breaker's like overlapping on itself and not getting cut. So I don't know. It's just an experimentation, but he said he's going to notch these for me. So I'll try them out and see what happens. Cause I talked to him about making end mills for me. And he's like, dude, it's probably just way cheaper for me to like modify ones already. I'm like, well, the YGs leave a bitchin' finish and they're cheap.
Yeah.
So you can just, charge me a couple bucks or whatever to notch these.
Do you have a chip fan? Do you keep a chip fan in the machine?
I have one. I don't have it in the machine. It's definitely one of those things I might be running on the automation. I'm not sure. I've played with it, but I end up just not.
Do you have through spindle coolant?
Huh?
Do you have through spindle coolant?
I do have 3-spindle coolant, yeah.
Yeah. Because kind of what I'm getting at is, say say the chip breaker finisher doesn't work out and you just need to run a normal finisher, whatever it is. If it's going to be custom modified, then chances are you're going to run into a situation where you don't have time to modify a finisher, that sort of thing. Something you could do just for the sake of automation, or even just without automation, just you don't want to deal with chips getting built up around your part, is come back with that chip fan and you can actually use a through spindle coolant and actually follow the same finishing contours to a few inches above the part, blast away those chips. So basically do one finish pass and then blast away those chips, come back and do another finishing pass. And that second, basically spring pass, you're barely going to have any chips at all coming off of it. So you won't have to worry about it on that second time around.
Okay.
That makes sense. You can blast.
My big issue is the chips in the machine.
Right.
Building up.
Right.
Like, they seem to flush pretty well off the table, especially since I put so I've got the laying plate and then I've got the fourth, which takes up a lot of space. And then I have all the octane work holding, the T-slot covers like in between.
Yeah.
So I think that with the flood coolant keeps the table like actually super clean. But where the problem is like the chips just flushing in like off the back. Like they get basically just get stuck on like the entrance to the chip chute.
Something I've done before too, to avoid those long chips if I didn't have a chip breaker, is basically finish like whatever that step down my finish passes. So I'll do, like maybe split it into thirds. So I'll do finish pass, finish pass, finish pass. My last one's at full depth. Then do a spring pass at full depth.
Like just blend it all.
Get rid of the little witness marks or whatever.
Yeah.
That way you get short chips. And then on your spring pass, I mean, those chips are so thin, even though they're full length, they're so thin that they're usually not.
You didn't carry out with everything else.
Yeah. So that's another option. Just a solution.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of guys I've talked to with the automation stuff where it's like, I'm kind of in the same thing. Like, I don't care if it takes longer. Like, I just want it to be reliable.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially if I run like overnight or like during the day while I'm at work or something like that. Like, okay, if it's a 2-hour cycle and it takes 4 hours, but I'm not there to like swap parts anyway, like it doesn't really matter. Like I'd rather have it take 4 hours and not have to touch it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I program a lot of my parts like that and I get hassled for it, but it's the same thing. If I'm not going to be here swapping the parts anyway, it's going to sit no matter what. I'd rather program it, make sure it's going to make it through everything, no issues at all, and I can come back to a part that's finished, swap it, do the same thing.
Yep. Yeah, because it's the same thing with like the Speedio. Like, sure, I can run that thing at like 400 or 500 inches a minute, but like, if I'm worried I'm gonna like break an end mill, like honestly, one of the biggest issues with the Speedio, especially when you're running fast, is that the instant that you like lose coolant, I don't even really lose coolant, but sometimes it'll get blocked by like a feature or something that you don't even know, and then it's like boom, just like end mill explodes.
Yeah, because the coolant on those machines is weird because it's not attached to your spindle, right? So you got to
so it comes out like the guy has like these little arms on the sheet metal, which there's guys that make them, but then it's like even I don't know. I keep looking at some of the options like that because even on the on the fourth axis, it's still kind of tight.
Yeah,
with some of the tools and some of the other stuff. So you're like, do I really want to add another like couple inches on the nose? Like when you're trying to do, off axis like fourth stuff. Like it's already kind of tight anyway. Like, do I want like a big coolant ring or a big? So I don't know.
Are you able to run through spindle and float at the same time? Like, can it keep up?
Okay, I think that's going to be my solution for some of this stuff. It's just that I think I was talking to Brad, or I think I was talking to somebody in the chat. I need to get some of the like coolant jet.
Or the
There
jet
are a couple tools that I think I just need to set up that way that I think would solve a lot of my problems, and then I could just run the through spindle.
I've ran through spindle right through a normal ER collet too.
Oh, I go the other day. I don't know if it was because it was a ER16. It was so small, but I was getting like no pressure.
Well,
Really?
you've got to, say you're at the bottom end of that range in that collet. It's
Yeah.
collapsing in on itself, and so your slots get a lot smaller as your tool is smaller, whatever it is, like if you're using a drill or something. But I haven't tried it on ER16, but like ER20, ER32, I've done it before, just in a weird pocket or something where the coolant isn't hitting it the way I want to. I'll just try on little coolant, let it flush through the collet.
Yeah, this was a regular 1/8 inch. It was on these like blocks that I make, and it was because of like I'm doing like a slot or but like the coolant's kind of blocked from one side. And I think that's why I kept breaking end mills, is because I think as it would come through, it would get blocked by the high side of this slot. And then like, dude, that's 16K in aluminum. That thing just loads up like in a half second and snaps off.
Have you thought about going to shrink fit?
I do have a lot of shrink fit, but I might be able to. Was it Brad? Were you the one that was talking about wire EDMing the holes in the?
You
shrink
can
fit?
wire EDM some slots on your tool. Heimer has them in theirs already, and they're actually not made for, from what they told me at IMTS, is they weren't designed for through spindle coolant. It's just for it to expand and contract easier, the slots, but they
It
work
just
for
happens to
through
be
spindle.
convenient for that.
Yep, and they work great. The slots are far better than the Haas ones with the 2 holes.
Yeah, those are not good at all.
No.
I don't even bother using it.
Yeah, so I guess I just need to find. That might be one of those things. I need to find somebody that's got good shrinks in. Well, the other thing too is it seems harder to find shrinks in BT30 with a lot of those. A lot of those options.
Yeah.
So if I because Haas doesn't even have. I've been getting a lot of my shrinks from Shars, which is like their Tagaras, which are nice, but I mean they have a lot of selection, but they don't have coolant hole. It's just 2 or 3 lengths per size or whatever. And that's pretty much it.
You have any friends with a EDM?
I know I need to find one.
You could send them to John Fetty here in Minnesota. He'll do them for you. I built him a block to hold the holders, and he can wire them out.
Oh, nice. Maybe I'll do that.
He actually, we talked about it, and he sent it down to Mari, and he had them balanced just to see if they were out at all, and they came in pretty good.
They were like on the money pretty much.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, let's go into some more questions. I know we've got a handful of questions from Instagram.
Yeah. Let's see. So we've already covered the one from Tech Garage.
Man, the middle wants to know in graphic details the tastiest hot dog. You want to share that until Pat finds a question?
I'm not a big hot dog person.
Oh,
Hot dogs are gross.
never
I
run
love hot dogs.
with a lap ham like that. You gotta like sausage.
Yeah, I'm more of a pulled sausage kind of person.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Some sauerkraut.
Pat, you got a good question?
Well, you had some stacked up, Pat. What happened?
Yeah, well, you guys are distracting me.
I got confused about hot
What a hot
dogs.
dog talk.
Right. Let's see.
Upside down.
Mustard.
Christopher Tofu says, "Do you or do you not grease your pull stud?"
I do not grease the pull studs. I do not put anything on the pull studs. The Speedios are supposedly a little temperamental, which I don't really know because I read it a couple times. And so basically all I do, thread the pull stud in there dry, and I torque it to 12 foot-pounds with a Mari pull stud thing and a torque wrench, and that's pretty much it. And I've never had an issue. I've heard you can do it on Cat 40 too. I never really had an issue, but I've heard on BT30, if you torque them too much, you can actually flare the end of the tool.
Yeah, I've heard the steam holder.
Like, so you can basically kind of like bell out the tool holder. from torquing them too much. And I've always only ever torqued mine to like, I think it's 15 Newton meters or something they call out, or 12. I think it ends up being like 12 foot-pounds.
Yeah.
And I've got like a nice like Wera torque wrench. That's like pretty much all I use it for. And, it's been 3 years. I've never had an issue with like pull studs, retention, but no, I don't put any grease or anything on there.
I do the same.
Or retaining compound, nothing on the pull, like just dry pull stud into the brand new holder or whatever, and then torque it down, and that's it.
Yep. I do the exact same thing, except I think it's like 50 foot-pounds or 55 foot-pounds or something for.
Yeah, the Cat 40s are a lot more.
Yeah. But no, I've heard the same thing. I remember seeing in a study that somebody did, and they showed like the contact patch.
Yeah, I remember seeing pictures somewhere where somebody had like glued them up.
I tried to find that the other day when I was talking to somebody about it, but I couldn't. But yeah,
Dang, I remember seeing it, but I can't find it again for the life of me.
yeah. But yeah, you intentionally over torqued it, and then you could see where it flared out at the top of the taper.
Yeah,
Then you're not getting actual taper lock whenever the tool holder goes into the spindle.
And there's not much to a BT30 anyway. So every little bit. Lost cameras.
Yeah, I'm still here for some reason. Camera turned off.
But yeah, I mean, with a BT30, they're so tiny. I mean, it doesn't take much. I was actually shocked when you said 12 foot-pounds because, I mean, that's hardly anything.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the pull studs are so small. So that's interesting. The Shop Incorporated asked, what was the hardest thing to learn on the Brother controls?
honestly, the brother control was pretty easy.
Really?
They run Nook, right?
I've heard it's kind of like a Linux or something back end, and it takes all pretty much FANUC control, like from what I understand, it's all the FANUC like kind of codes and stuff like that. But I don't know. I've never really ran a Haas control, so I don't know. Everybody says that's quote unquote like the easiest. I think the only thing that would be nice would be, which I think the new D00 control has, is more visual on like the probing, which is a little bit easier to set up. But I don't know. I got the thing on the floor and was making parts in like a day. And like I was making parts the same day I had the machine on the floor, and that's coming from somebody that I've never worked in a shop. I don't have a lot of experience. The only machine I had before that was a FANUC control and the Fidal. So those are the only two machines I've ever really ran. And I was able to figure it out. And like, once the techs and everybody got me kind of the point of like loading programs and doing that, like most of it's not that hard. You can kind of just, clumsy your way through the control. And it's like, you press a button and you look at the options, and it's, if you really need to, you can look at the manual or whatever. It's not as complicated as people make it. I don't know. I'm one of those people, for whatever reason, I don't really care about the control, to be honest. Like I would have
main point of
better
today.
machine over a control.
Makes sense.
As long as you know your way around it to put in what you need to put in there.
You're gonna learn whatever it is, and then when you hear people debate things every day, like it doesn't matter what you have, there's gonna be people that love it and people that hate it. It's like, Haas, Mazak, Mori, Okuma, everybody there's like, oh, I love this control. It's the best thing ever. It's the greatest thing to use. And then other people are like, I hate that control. So like the way I look at it, like if you have a machine that you're comfortable with and you know how to like set offsets and pick things up and change settings and do whatever, like at the end of the day, it to me is no different than driving a car. You're going to learn how to drive whatever car you're driving, and you do.
I mean, I ran FANUC controls for the longest time, and then I bought a Haas, and then it was like, at first I didn't like it at all, but now I'm just used to it. It is what it is.
Yeah, but then if for some reason you bought some other machine, like you'd figure that out, and like I think if you're halfway competent, like you can figure out any control.
Yeah, I do. I will say I do like the Okuma OSP controls. They're nice.
Yeah,
they're really nice.
Everybody I've talked to has something good to say about those.
Yeah. I mean, if I was to be able to choose a control, I would pick that one. And their code is a little bit different. Like you don't have to have the G43H value in there either, so it's kind of nice.
I think in my future, if I was to buy something, maybe 5-axis, maybe not 5-axis, but if I was to buy something that wasn't a Speedio and I wanted like some sort of like big boy machine, it would most likely be an Okuma, probably like the 560V or something like that. To run like burly parts, to run big drills, you know.
Basically the opposite of a Speedio.
Yeah. Which I think would be complimentary. Like, you know what I mean?
For sure. I got two more, Joe. Another thing, this one's more funny, also from Tuck Garage. Do you get any yahoos in your shop? Do you get any walk-ins?
I don't get any walk-ins because I bet all those people ahead of time.
Yeah, that's smart. Hashtag
Yeah.
no walk-ins.
So I do have like some ads that I kind of run, and you get stuff from that, or you get referral. You know what I mean? If you're doing job shop work, if your answer to job shop work is anything besides no, I don't do job shop work, you know what I mean? Which there's obviously, I have friends like that. You know, I have friends that run only their own product. You know, so they send me customers. I get just, I do get just oddball people contacting me. But, it's like anybody else, I'm sure Brad or anybody else gets stuff at some point where you're just like, okay, this is going to, if you can buy this, just buy it. And the not going to save you any, you know what I mean? I'm not going to make you this custom because you don't want to buy one off Amazon for $30. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or,
all the time.
yeah. So it's just, if you can buy it, buy it. If you really need something custom, we could work out something where you could buy this for $30 and I could possibly modify it for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's an option if it's like, hey, you need this thing and I don't know what Cam's doing over there.
What I always find interesting is you get these people that show up with something they want made and they have something they can buy, but it's slightly different. And you tell them, well, I can't do it for $30. It's going to cost you $150. And they're like, well, why? I can buy this one for $30. Why can't you do the same thing, but do this? It's like, I'm making one. I didn't make 10,000 of these things to sell online.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll even bring them my computer and I'll pull up. I'm like, well, here's your material. And it's like $60. I'm like, well, how do they do it for that? I'm like, they did 10,000 of them. They're not doing more.
That kind of goes. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, that's actually one of those things that to kind of touch on that back to like machine shop stuff is that's actually been a good way for me to kind of like leverage myself as I've gotten a little bit bigger and done a little bit more work is now I've been able to kind of like wrap jobs together and order more material across multiple jobs. Which I think has helped like trying to keep like prices better. Like I found that's been a good way for me to keep, especially my gig customers, try to keep their prices like as stable as possible. And you know what I mean? Hey, instead of buying one stick for this guy's job, like I said, on the other job I've got like 4 or 5 parts that all share the same material. So now I'm not as worried, like I'll buy 10 sticks of this material and have them all cut. And it's like, because even if job A doesn't use it, job B will, you know what I mean? I'm not as worried that I'm going to get stuck with, 500 pounds of material for this one job. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that people don't understand. And the pricing difference is crazy. Like if you call and you're just like, hey, I need, even like a stick or something. Hey, I need 1 stick of this. And it's like, okay. Yeah, that 1 stick's going to be, $200 or whatever. Okay. But I can buy 5 sticks for, $400.
Yeah.
Like the volume pricing of like what people do is different. And then, I think I was listening to that Within Tolerance podcast with Jim from Sen Cut Sen, and just having him talk about being able to make parts, even their one-off parts and custom parts for people less than they can get material. Like that shows you how much of a swing there is when you're buying that volume of material. Like if you walk in off the street, yeah, you're going to pay $2 a pound or something for steel, at least here. You're paying like $1.80, $2 a pound. But it's like you start ordering truckloads of steel. It's like, their shop, they're probably paying 50 cents a pound, or if that, or whatever. If you're buying, just massive truckloads at a time and running them through a laser or whatever, but that same mentality applies to aluminum, steel, brass, like whatever you want to buy. It's like, if you buy enough of it, it gets like, it's not like, oh, hey, we're going to knock off 5%. It's like, we're going to knock off 50%,
Right.
if you buy enough.
Yeah, volume's definitely the way to go when it comes to big purchases, man. We went from we go through a lot of sheet metal at the fab shop here. Anything from like 1/4 inch steel, 5x10 sheets or whatever. And buying a few from essentially a distributor. We actually got to where we were buying it directly from the mill, and buying like 80 sheets of 1/4 inch per week. And you'd be amazed how much difference there is in that. And same thing with bar stock. There's kind of like what you were just talking about. There's a job we used to do a lot of last year. Well, this year rather. Last year by the time people are listening. And like one bar might be $150 or so. If we buy 7 bars, it's like $300.
Yeah, it's very
It's absurd.
A lot of time when I'm quoting jobs, I'll add in, even if it's one part, I'll see what 2 is. And sometimes I can get 2 for the price of 1, so I just order 2.
or it's so negligible that you're like, whatever, I'll just put it on a shelf. If another one, I've already got it here. If I need it for another job, it's basically free.
Yeah, I've done that with jobs where I've ordered double quantity just because the price, like I might spend an extra $100 on a $1,100 order just to get double, and I throw it on the shelf, and then I've been lucky where it's came back and I already got the material ready to go.
Yeah, or if it's kind of like material that's like general, what I mean? If I'm getting like 2x2 bar or something, it's like, well, I can even if I'm going to waste a lot of material, I know I can make a lot of parts out of that material.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's the cost was so negligible, and it's like, I can rip through aluminum so fast that like, okay, I'm adding another 10 seconds of roughing or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's not that big of a deal, but it is the whole pricing aspect. It does make it hard for small shops to get ahead, or like, especially when you're just starting out. I remember too when I was starting out where you'd keep like a piece of material that was like the size of a nickel, I'm going to go put this on the shelf. I can need it later. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I think everybody gets into that thing where like, well, I paid for this. And it's like, and then you get to the point where like, God damn it, I'm just tripping over all this shit because I got so much material. Like half of it I don't know what to do. It's just, okay, like this is going in the solids bin. This is going, I've got a couple of buddies that just do hobby stuff. I'm like, dude, I got this pile. You can come over. You can literally just take whatever you want.
Right?
Yeah. All right. This might wrap up with this one. So, Joe, you've been at it a long time. You started with it as a hobby, got into fabrication. Now here you are with 2 brother machines. I mean, that's impressive. Looking back, this question from Rebecca Wolfinger: what would you do differently if you could go back and change how you've gone through this process?
There's a million different factors that go into like what works for you, and only you can make that decision. The Fadal definitely had its place, and I don't know if I wouldn't say I regret buying that machine, but I also, if there was something I'd change, I don't think I would have minded just going in for the Speedio and buying that brand new to start out with. It's hard to go back in time and kind of, it's easier to look back with that 2020 vision and, everything looks good, or it's easy to analyze, when you're already looking backwards. And it's harder to like see the future. I would say, and I don't even say new machine, but like a newer machine that's like faster. The tool changes are faster. Like you can add probing, you can add tool setter, like you can have like, depending on what you're doing, if you're doing job shop work, some of that stuff is just massive. It's like it's such a massive time saver that you don't even know until and the idea of spending 10 grand on a tool setter and a probe, it's like, oh man. But then like you get it and you're just like, dude, the in process stuff for me, or like just the tool breakage alone has been huge. To be able to run a 30-40 minute program or whatever and have like tool breakage set up and just have it check. And the Speedio is so fast at checking it too. It's like, okay, it takes me 2 seconds to check a tool, then it's like, I can just leave the house. I can leave, you know what I mean? And I've had it where, yeah, something's broken, coolant gets blocked or something, breaks off a tool or, whatever weird reason happens, you come back and like, oh, there's a tool broken off and it's over at the tool setter and it's basically on hold. It's like nothing really happened, you know? Um, all the nicety, all the like relatively new stuff, the technology has come such a huge way that like I don't think there's any way I could go back to an old machine. And I definitely think there's like a legacy issue of there's definitely generations. Like I think even I think a lot of the older Haas machines are great. And I think Brad probably has the sweet spot for a lot of that stuff where you can get good machines for a good price. Like I might be in a different spot if I had gone that way because I feel like the Fadal was a little bit more archaic in that sense of it was a chore to like add any of that stuff. And the thing was so slow. I mean, you're talking 30 seconds to a minute, like just to change a tool. All those kinds of things become options when you're just like, dude, if I was to add 5 more tool changes, like if I'm running 100 parts and you're adding 5 tool changes on the Fadal, you're like, dude, I just added like 4 or 5 minutes per part. Like you're just like, you're adding 1 or 2 tool changes. You're like, I'm adding hours to this job every time I add a tool change. It's crazy to think about. And you know what I mean? And then, then you are kind of worried about if stuff breaks. There's this peace of mind that like you have a newer machine. And as I said, there's definitely a trade-off. Like, I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and run out and buy a new machine, but like newer or at least get the best that you could afford. You know what I mean? If you're serious about it.
I think it's hard to look back and say you changed something when you found success in what you've done.
100%. That's the other thing that's hard too, is like I learned a lot of the Fadal. Like if I didn't have the Fadal, I wouldn't really know that I needed some of the stuff on the Speedio.
Yeah. I mean, if you've had a lot of issues over the years, you could look back and be like, oh shit, I would have bought a Speedio instead of dealing with the Fadal for 5 years.
Yeah.
But you jumped into something and it's worked for you and you've been successful with it. So why change anything?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Hindsight's always 20/20, where it is easy to look back and be like, well, I would do that. But at the time, like, I don't think I would have done it differently because, it was a good stepping stone. It got me to where I was. It was it was a nice, clean machine. Like I really had, relatively no, I think I had 1 or 2 like little issues with it, but overall, like it was super reliable. But you found, you found the limits where you're like, okay, if I want a round bore, like I'm finishing at 50 inches a minute. You know what I mean? If I want to, get this finish, I'm finishing there. It's like, so to go to the Speedio and be like, well, damn, I can do that same thing at 150 inches a minute, like no problem. Like now you start doing the math in your head real quick. And you're just like, well, damn, these parts are, this whole part takes me 22 minutes or something on the Fadal. And it's like, well, all I have to do is like bump the feed rate and bumped it. And like, oh man. So it's like the first couple parts I ran, it just kind of like exploded my mind a little bit because you're just like, dude, I just basically like tripled everything. The machine didn't even blink. And like the parts look way better. Or you're just like, I just literally paid, you know what I mean? And you're like, well, I'm not going to change my pricing. Like, I'm not going to call my customers and be like, well, I'm making your parts 3 times faster now. So, I'm going to charge you a third, bro. Well, also with 3 hours.
Watching that in the chat yesterday, I think I try to buy the same machines because I would have a hard time buying a lesser machine and having it run slow. I don't think if I had something that ran slow, if I had an umbrella changer, if I got a great deal on the machine and I ran it, I'd be like, oh, this sucks.
You're going to injure yourself because you're not going to, like, even mentally, you're going to just not want to do it, and that's why I think I ended up going for this Brother is because, well, it's got the, I would have been happy with any spindle for the, deal I got it for, but, it's got the high-speed spindle. It's essentially the same thing as a Speedio. So it's like, I'm not really handicapping myself at all, but yeah, like, I just think I'm at the point where I'm done with like the used old machines that need like a ton of work or something. Yep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't want to sound like too whatever, but you get to the point where you're like, I got too much stuff to do.
Not worth your time. Not worth it to be working on machines all the time, No.
Yeah,
You have parts to make.
exactly.
It was funny you brought up that, you're not worried about tool changes. You can bring back up a tool multiple times. I started on my first CNC I started on was a Fadal. It was a big Fadal, so the Z had a 30-inch travel, and I would always program.
But to get up there.
Yeah, I would always program, I'd make sure I'd never bring back a tool.
Yeah.
And that's how I've always done it. But the last year or so, I've kind of got away from that. And I struggled with it because I'd always try to order my operations, to make it work. If I brought up a 1/4-inch tool, I'm not bringing that back.
Yeah.
But I do it all the time now. I'll bring it back.
That's 100% how I was with the Fadal. Is like
Yeah.
you wanted to make sure you only use the tool. It just seems so ridiculous to use a tool like multiple times. And now with the Speedio, like I don't even think about it. It's like, oh, I need that tool. I need it. And, just for sake of being, efficient, like I'll try to like nest stuff, or do I really need to recall that tool, or can I do it a way where I can nest these operations together just to make the program more efficient, so you're not just wasting time. But yeah, like if it needs to be a certain way, or it's like, oh, I need to clear this out to get to a certain feature to do these couple little features while I've got like rigidity still in the material before I've, roughed everything out or something to that effect. I don't even think twice about it anymore.
Yeah, I was, as you guys were talking briefly before we wrap this up, you guys were talking about tool changes and stuff. I usually group stuff together too, by tool. It drives me nuts to call up a tool twice.
Yep.
But picture this. So recently I've gotten into where I'm trying to tab parts on a 4th axis. Which usually means that's probably one of the cases where you're going to be doing like, I'm going to use this tool to do some roughing here, then do some finishing, then do some more roughing, some more finishing, whatever. Call up a chamfer tool 2-3 times just because you can't get to this or that beforehand.
Right.
But typically the machine that I get to do that on is a tool room mill from Haas that has, I think 200 inch per minute rapids. And the tool changes tool to tool, or I guess chip to chip, is 6 or 7 seconds, and you only have 10 tools in the carousel. I guess we'll wrap it up here, boys.
And we'll do it again when I got a 10,000 square foot shop with 10 speeds.
You can give us a tool out.
Just to kind of throw it out there, like I've been doing this for a while now, but I know, a lot of people have questions. Like I don't mind people if people want to know, if they want to hit me up about something, like honestly, feel free. I try to get in DMs. I try to like help people out. Like I know it can be frustrating to like have questions, especially if you're trying to like learn Fusion or learn CAM or learn CAD or learn like whatever you're trying to learn, or even just processes or machines, or you want to get something going. Like I genuinely love this stuff. I love talking about it. If you've got like good structured questions, or you want to like discuss pros and cons about something, like hit me up. But then on the other hand, if you want to have the same debate like 15 times about which benchtop mill you want to buy, maybe not.
All right, well, audience, remember to give us all the likes and comments and all that stuff. Really helps us out if you engage with us. Check out all of our Instagram accounts. You can find Joe on Instagram as @randomfabrication.